Dear Thomas, dear everyone, it's a real privilege to have you all tonight with us here in the Mind and Life Friends community. It's a very special occasion to welcome Thomas Legrand. I would like to introduce you, Thomas, and then would like to ask some more personal questions to start with before going into the more official talk of yours. But first of all, I would like to greet everyone. My name is Gábor Kársai, Managing Director of Mind and Life Europe, and this is a Mind and Life Europe Friends program. Thomas Legrand holds a PhD in ecological economics and has studied international development, political science, and management. He works in the field of sustainability for UN agencies, companies, and NGOs, with a focus on forest conservation, climate change, sustainable finance, organizational transformation, and leadership. He currently works with the UNDP on the Conscious Food Systems Alliance, which is a new initiative, and Mind and Life Europe is part of that, together with the Mindfulness Initiative in the UK and many other organizations. It was a real privilege to have you, Thomas, with us during our ESRI program this summer as a faculty member, and it's a real honor to have you also today with us. And my first question to you would be how you came to write this book. But before that, probably if you can share a little bit about your journey, your spiritual journey. I described your more professional official background, but I know that you live a deep spiritual life and practice that we can probably hear a little bit more about, and how that journey led you to write this book before entering into the presentation of the book itself. So
Thank you, Gábor. Thanks, everyone. My pleasure to be here with you tonight to talk about this book on which I've worked over the last 10 years. And probably, you know, I guess this idea of the link or the relevance of spirituality, inner development for society's development. I think I've been probably there from almost the beginning of my spiritual path, which started some 20 years ago with an encounter with native spirituality in Mexico, when I was doing a student exchange there. So I met a group or different groups of shamans and experienced a very deep, profound connection to the earth and myself, and decided right away that this was what I had always looked for without really being able to put a name on it. So I was able to immediately recognize that it should be the priority of my life. And yeah, from there I changed it changed how I approach the rest of my life, my work. When I came back to finish my study for a semester in France, I decided to graduate in international development, because it's really this spiritual experience put me really in a spirit of service. So I spent 3 years in Mexico trying to learn as much as I can from these traditions. I started to work in the field of microfinance there, and when I came back to France 3 years after, and I was really from this reconnection with the earth. I was really eager to work for the earth, and that's why I did later on a PhD in ecological economics. And I continue exploring different spiritual traditions, and I was always interested about the wisdom they could offer to deal with our social and, of course, environmental problems. So from the beginning, I was, exposed to this idea that social change needed to be grounded in personal changes. When I was at the same time, there was this idea that we were experiencing very special times in terms of humanity evolution. And this framework, this lens through which I was increasingly making sense of the happening of the world, of humanity in evolution, in a process of spiritual evolution. I think when I discovered that 20 years ago, was still not so present. But when I connected to Mexico, there was this Mayan prophecy of 2012 that was already setting a seed. But then I was more and more connected with this different wisdom tradition that was telling this story about humanity in evolution. And 10 years ago, I started to work on this book to be able to share that understanding and how we could rather partner through politics with evolution and helping this cultural evolution of a spiritual nature to facilitating it by prioritizing with a new development paradigm, a wisdom-based approach to politics that I call the politics of being.
You may also share how you got connected to Plum Village and what your connection with that special community is today.
Indeed, thank you, Gabor. I live since 2015. I've been living next to Plum Village, the monastery of Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. That was, the first, I think I was really drawn to this place. The first time I met my wife, she told me she wanted to visit Plum Village. And when we first came there in 2014, we felt like that was a place where we should settle down. So, and my reflection with the politics of being, I think I've been very nurtured by the teachings of then Master Thich Nhat Hanh on engage Buddhism and applied spirituality. What this can mean for how we are dealing with current challenges.
Thank you. We have a great friend here with us, Catherine Ware, who is member of the Mind and Life Europe Association, and she co-authored the book with Thich Nhat Hanh. And so their work in Plum Village is really essential and one of the greatest examples for us all. So it's good to hear that not only some of our friends, but some others are also linked to that community, like you, Thomas. So the talk today you are going to give us is about your upcoming book, which is going to be published soon. So we are probably one of the first ones to hear about it. And I know that Mathieu Ricard wrote a foreword to this book, who is also a great friend of ours and member of the Mind and Life Europe Association and an honorary board member. And the title of your book, as you have already mentioned, partly is Politics of Being, Wisdom and Science for a New Development Paradigm. So we are looking forward to hearing from you what you mean by politics of being and why it's different from politics in general and other more traditional classical forms of politics, and how you see the role of wisdom and science in developing that new paradigm, probably not only of development, but also of human relationships and politics in general. So I would like to ask you to maybe share a little bit more about the book itself.
Sure. Gabor, I will share my screen.
Yes, it works well.
It's working well? Yes, you can see my screen?
You can see the title slide. So hopefully
Okay.
It's going to work when you start clicking as well.
Yeah, good. So
works well.
Yes. So first is the recognition, as I started to say, that we really greatly need a cultural evolution. And I think the main reason for that is that we have been very much focused over the last, I would say, at least 2 centuries on developing our technological power, our economic power, and this has brought a lot of benefits and has made the world we know today much more complex. But at the same time, we have not been able to develop the wisdom we need to balance this power and manage this complexity. As the Dalai Lama said, is that the fundamental problem is that at every level we are giving too much attention to the external material aspect of life while neglecting moral ethics and inner values. So I think there is an increasing recognition for this inner change at the social level, a cultural evolution. It was the Earth Charter 20 years ago already talked about a change of mind and heart. So I believe this cultural evolution is of a spiritual nature, and I can explain that a little bit more after. And even institutions like the United Nations Development Programme can now say, for example, in its last Human Development Report, nothing short of a wholesale shift in mindsets is needed to navigate the brave new world of the Anthropocene. Okay, so we are facing a systemic crisis. It seems like all our institutions are no longer really responding to be able to deal with the challenges we are facing, and it's basically that of a model that has been initiated in the West based on specific values such as materialism, reductionism, individualism, utilitarianism, humanism, anthropocentrism. So as part of this cultural program, our main objectives as societies has been to master nature, to fulfill our material needs. That has been, we could say, our focus, let's say, over the last maybe 2 centuries for European countries, for example. And this is what it forms a cultural narrative, what Charles Eisenstein calls the story of separation. In this worldview, we feel we are separate from each other, from nature, and it seems we see ourselves as maximizer of our material self-interest. And what Charles Eisenstein is saying that we are moving towards a new story, a new narrative, a new way to understand ourselves and relate to the world, which he calls the story of interbeing. And this new narrative is, of course, rooted in new discoveries in science, which tell a very different story about who we are and our human potential, and I believe through my work also of our social potential. So it tells more and more a story of a conscious, intelligent universe, of our interconnection, and the need to have systems thinking. It points to our nature of interbeing and the need to cultivate this sense of community that we have been missing. And it sees human flourishing not as just accumulating money or power or fame, but rather as expressing our gifts for the common good. And it brings maybe a more deeper meaning to the humanistic vision, emphasizing also our spiritual nature and our inner world, and calls us to become responsible members of the Earth's community. So the new program for our societies that could emerge from this new narrative, from this new worldview, would be rather to strive together as one Earth family. So one program is now very ill and trying to die, the story of separation. And because it has some difficulties in letting go, it can lead, it's bringing the worst at the moment, but also we have at the same time a new narrative, a new program that wants to emerge that is bringing the best. That is why, for example, Noah Harari, who wrote the book Sapiens, for example, said, we are on the threshold of both heaven and hell. Okay, so how does this translate, in terms of vision for, or in terms of development of our society? So first, there is a recognition that our current development paradigm, which has been mainly focused on economic growth, needs to change. Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, said the old model is broken. We need to create a new one. And there are some different reflections put on the table to offer a new development paradigm. In general, it's emphasized that it needs more sustainable, maybe more qualitative, more human, more integral. But I believe behind all these proposals, there is a fundamental orientation, which is the one from having to an orientation towards being. And that's the Earth Charter said, when basic needs have been met, human development is primarily about being more, not having more. So that is why I call politics of being a wisdom-based approach to development, the Earth Charter being very much rooted in this kind of wisdom ethical approach. And this evolution is coherent with the work of sociologists like Engelhardt, for example, who show that developed countries, for example, over the last decades, are moving from materialism to post-materialism, and more fundamentally from survival to self-expression. So the politics of being, as I said, is this wisdom-based approach to politics, and it is informed by science. So these are the two legs on which it works. Consider being as our main collective goal and means. So being is also, needs to be cultivated along the way. And by being, I mean all beings, all living beings, not only human beings. And what I mean by being is expressing our full potential. And we could simply explain that by our truest being, which is who we are. And it's our interbeing or relational nature. And society should allow to help us manifest that and be able to fulfill our healthy aspirations of what we want to do, for example, in societies. And it's also our highest being, so the development of our virtues and qualities. So the politics of being aims at aligning our institutions with our true reason to be here on Earth, becoming who we are, the best and most complete version of ourselves. So many, when we talk about this kind of shift in consciousness, many people take a bottom-up approach, like change is happening in consciousness at the individual level, and then it can allow new institutions to manifest. My focus is more on, of course, this is very important. My focus is more about what are these kind of wiser institutions and how can they facilitate this evolution in a virtuous circle where institutions allow human flourishing and the development of wisdom, and which then in turn allow to adapt and refine these institutions. This echoes the voice of who is maybe now the most influential thinker on institutions with Elinor Ostrom, who was the first woman to receive the Economic Nobel Prize in 2009. So she said, she summed up, when she received this Nobel Prize, she summed up the main lessons she has learned during her work. She said, designing institutions to force or nudge entirely self-interested individuals to achieve better outcomes has been the major goal posited by policy analysts for governments to accomplish for much of the past half century. Extensive empirical research leads me to argue that instead, the core goal of public policy should be to facilitate the development of institutions that bring out the best in humans. So said very simply, we have considered ourselves selfish and we design institutions which worked on this with this vision on competition, scarcity, etc. And it reinforced these traits in all character. And she said we should rather design institutions that deal with our social problems, but at the same time, cultivating the best, helping us cultivate the best in ourselves. So I will give an example. For example, in the field of justice, the main paradigm often is retributive justice. So it means that whoever breaks the law receives a proportional punishment in return. And this paradigm we see is really not working. It is widely questioned in terms of efficiency and fairness. And there is a systemic crisis. It is in systemic crisis with rising delays and costs, mass incarceration, recidivism, etc. On the contrary, an alternative paradigm is restorative justice. So it's how does that work? Well, basically, it's about bringing together all stakeholders, including offenders and victims and community members, in a non-adversarial process, so a dialogue focused on healing and reintegration. And we see that this approach works very well in terms of satisfaction rates for victims and offenders. It has a potential to reduce the cost of doing justice and increase the response to crime efficiency, and probably perform at least slightly better in terms of reoffending. But what is interesting there is that instead of relying on our instinct for retaliation, it rather allows all those involved to cultivate and practice their human qualities of deep listening, of understanding, of awareness, responsibility. So it's a human technology that if we rely more and more, we can improve. And that allows to deal with crime, but at the same time, help us cultivate these human values. So a theory of change about, why spiritual evolution, or we could say being, as I defined it, expressing our true nature, cultivating the best version of ourselves, can help us for sustainability and the thriving of our societies. So we have to recognize that our model operates on the story of separation I have mentioned, and a lot of especially our economic systems work relies on our disconnection with ourselves, or disconnection that fuels consumerism and certain behaviors or search for fame, power, money, etc. And our disconnection from other humans and nature. So what is the most fundamental or ultimate spiritual experience? So the great mystics tell us that it's when they become really who they are, they feel a sense of unity with all that is. They feel connected, or a sense of, we could say, interbeing. And obviously, if they feel one with whatever it is, they feel the need to take care of that and be in service. So we may not experience that ultimate state of consciousness, but it tells us about maybe the process. So like in our development process, we nourish 3 essential connections: to ourselves, to nature, and to other humans. And this can help bring us the wisdom we need and in care to at the social level to deal with our challenges, and also be the basis, the inner basis for sustainability. And science tells us that it's also connection to nature, to ourselves, and to others are key determinants of our happiness. It tells us like what's the most important. There's a lot of studies that that shows that. Yeah. So what's important there is that I think in terms of new narrative, I've seen, how the system tends to see environmental limits as a limit to economic growth, that they tend to equal with our well-being, which is not really the case. In this new story, our well-being is fundamentally depends on our connection with the earth and one another. So these are not just social environmental problems we just need to deal with. We can look at it much more positively. It's like we could be much better if we are more connected to the earth and others, and then obviously we'll deal much better with our social and environmental challenges. So I've mapped in this work where this new story of interbeing and also this new perspective in politics is manifesting. And I identified especially 7 categories. So, and they all correspond to, they all have a field of science, and they are entering also the political field. So for example, there are those which are involved in systemic complex thinking or integral thinking, and integral politics is providing also different types of solutions in different sectors. There are those that are more connected to the way nature works, and proposing that we should imitate, harmonize ourselves with nature's ways, such as the case of the buen vivir political philosophy, for example, in South America, which has led some governments which was at the basis of some governments. China is committed to become an ecological civilization, and obviously this may resonate with their Taoist background, for example. Happiness also, Bhutan has developed a new development paradigm that they call gross national happiness. And we see more and more countries, such as New Zealand, for example, that has a well-being budget now, adopting this perspective. Love, compassion, empathy. You may know this initiative, the Charter for Compassion, led by, inspired by Karen Armstrong, where in which a lot of local governments, cities commit to become compassionate cities. Peace, and in the UN there has been this resolution and program of action on culture of peace, or we could call it also a culture of partnership, which also comes with policy agendas. Mindfulness, you're very much aware of the work of mindfulness initiative, for example, in the UK, and this wonderful report of this vision for the country, UK mindful nation, and what this could mean in terms of public policies in different sectors. And the last one could be, we could call it mystery, and just an invitation to look a bit more, recognize that we know so little, even the matter we know observable is only 5% of the universe, physicians tell us. So how we can collectively be more in touch with that mystery and look more deeply into it, which can also lead us to more, sometimes more spiritual cultures. So when I found out, I tried to make sense, why is and I realized that these are all spiritual values, and that can be reflected by an awakened person. And I realized that there's a long tradition, even in Western thinking, about these type of highest values being kind of the framework for the good societies. So from Plato, we have the transcendentals, truth, goodness, beauty. And later on, the Catholic Church said they were manifestation of God. Freedom, Hegel said the sense of history was towards the realization of the spirit, which he said the main quality was freedom. Maybe in the economic system, there was this behind the materialism. There was maybe this idea of abundance, which can be also seen in a more spiritual way. So all these spiritual values can be the foundation of the politics of being, and from the science and how they translate into the political field, we can build a political agenda. And this agenda, it's I call it a second stage investment in human development. It's a direct investment. For example, when we're talking about education, when we're talking about mental health, or even how to invest more in childhood well-being as a basis for human flourishing. There we give directly people, the societies help people to flourish. But as I say, it's also an indirect investment. So each dimension of our societies in each sectors, we should be able to solve or to deal with our problems from a different paradigm, allowing at the same time to cultivate these highest human values. And as we have seen, for example, with restorative justice. So traditional policies have to be replaced or accompanied by policies embodying this interbeing paradigm, which cultivate our human, social, and natural potential. And by the way, when we are starting to and I started to research, what is the proposed alternative paradigm? What is the next? What is presented sometimes as the next frontiers in many of these sectors? I found out that this interbeing paradigm lies at the center of many ongoing sectorial paradigmatic changes. So it's this perspective, I can say, even when we approach it from sectors, we find that it's very relevant. I'm just checking, I can't see the time. Oh yes, I can see the time, that's fine. Very quickly, some examples. In the book, I've developed concrete policy agendas in 9 sectors. So let's have a look maybe at some. Education should be really redefined in terms of its objective, not to really fill up with knowledge, but rather an education for being that allow or integral development and the expression of people's authentic being and the cultivation of the best version of themselves. So there's a lot of, and indeed we see that there was this in 2014, there was this poll about what will be the most important skills of in 2030 to teach in education systems. And what comes out is our personal skills. The knowledge is accessible and changing so fast that it's no longer seen as the most important. The most are in such a fast changing and complex societies, personal skills are looked as the most important ones. So there's a lot. If we look at the more cutting edge approach in education at the moment, it calls about personalized educational curricula, where teachers are more to accompany the child in its own learning process. You probably know positive education and social emotional learning, where we try to help pupils develop the necessary skills for their well-being. Character and values education, cooperative learning. Classroom has often been a competitive space. We can foster much more cooperation. Topic-based teaching instead of different teachings in different disciplines that can help us think in a more interconnected, more systemic way. And there are examples, if you look at the Finnish educating systems, it has more or less incorporated all these dimensions. It is often quoted as an example in the world. In medicine and integrative medicine, where mental health is an important component, indeed we see even our health systems are changing, especially in rich countries. What we have more now are chronic disease, which depends a lot from our lifestyles. But our lifestyles themselves depend a lot from our mental health. And mental health is also directly a very important contributor to our physical health. So we see there can be very positive social returns in investing more in mental health. It's a bit crazy to see that even in rich countries, only 1/3 of people suffering from mental health problems have access to treatments. And I think in general, it tells us how collectively so much we are illiterate in terms of our inner world, and we can't see, we can't deal with the challenges there, and we can't take advantage of the opportunity that they could represent for societies. Recognizing the rights of nature, that's a very important one. I said it's really at the core of politics of being. This is for all beings. And we have already many countries now that have recognized rights to nature. And this seems a very wise approach that can allow to question our unlimited rights of us as people or of corporates. If we recognize that nature has rights, then comes the questions. For example, I don't know, we want to do, how do you say that? A dam on a river. This will damage the river. Do we really need this dam? Do we really need this hydroelectricity so much that we need to harm the river? So that calls for very fundamental questions about what is needed for our flourishing, to be able to find a balance between these different rights and allow harmonious coexistence between all living beings. There is a quote from the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, that is from 2010. Mother Earth is a living being. Mother Earth is a unique, indivisible, self-regulating community of interrelated beings that sustains, contains, and reproduces all being. And maybe I end up with this one, which is very interesting because it really expresses very well my methodology of bringing wisdom and science together. So this is the name of a book by Berggren and Gardels from 2013. And what they have done, so there is a Berggren Institute, which is working with very good political scientists from Asia and from Europe and America. And basically what they have done, they have asked Asian and Western scholars to think separately about what could be an ideal form of governance. And funny enough, they came up with both with a middle way that was taking the best of Western democracies and Asian, we could call meritocracies. So finding a balance between competence, like in meritocracy, those who knows decide, and popular control, like in Western democracy. And so these two, the Asian and the Western, find very similar models. And this model is itself quite similar to the way the Baha'i religion is organized. So I don't know if you know all the Baha'i religion. It comes from a prophet in the 19th century that is who was born in Iran. He's called Baha'u'llah, and talked about progressive revelation, like many prophets have come in different times and different space to allow these cultures to evolve, I could say. And he was aware that at the time of each new revelation, the main barrier was often the clergy in place from the previous revelation, we could say. And so he thought a lot about how to organize his religion without a clergy. And he said that this organization would evolve, but could become a template that humanity could freely adopt to organize ourselves. So, and it shares important features with the model of intelligent governance. So it's really funny, like how the best science and how wisdom can come together to point in the same direction. Which, you know, one of the main features was to have democracy, where people elect people at the bottom, at the local level, and then these representatives elect their representatives to the next level. But in particular, it's a non-adversarial democracy, because all democratic systems are in crisis. It's not the democratic ideal that seems no longer relevant, but really this adversarial democracy where parties fight each other, and the public debate gets really not the one we need to deal with our challenges. So I will go quick on that. Okay, so that's another wisdom or spiritual principle, that of unity in diversity. What is important is that these values that I've shown, on which the politics of being is built, are universal values, and as such, they can provide the ground for the world unification. At the same time, the work of sociologists like NGOs tell us that cultural evolution is path dependent. So where you're coming from determines how you are going forward. And so evolution needs is necessarily something that is specific. Each group, each nation has its own evolutionary path. So at the same time, each nation needs to define its own version of the good life and its own version of the politics of being. And to do that, they need to reconnect to their traditional wisdom, we could say. And interestingly enough, these traditional wisdom very often are in line with the story of interbeing, emphasizing our connection to one another and the earth, and the need to respect each other, be a responsible member of our communities. So there is some work also that nations should be doing in terms of recapitulating their history, reconnecting to their wisdom, being able to assess, make a collective psychological assessments of where they are, what are their strengths, what are the challenges, internal challenges, inner challenges they are dealing with, and be able to discover or reconnect to their soul and their purpose in the world. What is their specific genius they can offer to the world, to this universal politics of being. So a conclusion, an important point that I've not mentioned, but I talk about mental health, but the question of trauma is really important, because both at the individual and collective level, because trauma is often what impedes us to be and to live from this interbeing story or paradigm. As I mentioned, wisdom and science are the pillars of the politics of being. So what I found is wisdom kind of gives the direction, and so direction is about being, in that case, these highest spiritual values, and And the role of science is rather to validate, these orientations, or be able to, make sense of the wisdom. What can it mean in practice? And tell us, how we can make that happen. So my objective was to develop a strong rationale that I believe this is really what we need to be able to go through the 21st century. And I think I've written this book with this idea that this should be understandable and be able to be put to use by decision makers. I wanted to provide a simple but integrative framework where all the ideas, all the initiatives that are relevant from this spiritual wisdom approach can find a place, and offer concrete policy recommendations. Almost all are based on existing examples, and they can be easily replicable. And with this, to try to frame a new field of research and action in which everybody could contribute from its own perspective. That could be that of a scientist, could be that of a specific wisdom tradition, or could be that of a practitioner, for example, in different sectors. So the book will be available for pre-order from this Sunday onwards, and officially released on January 22nd. As Gabor said, it comes with a foreword by Mathieu Ricard, who called it a profound, insightful, extensively researched, sensitive, and much needed essay, which provides a precious roadmap for traveling together towards a better world. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for sharing the basic outline of your thinking and how you got to this structure and overall framework, how you framed your thoughts. And I would like to invite our friends here to think about questions or any comments or any other perspectives that they would like to share with you. While waiting for any of you, I would just like to ask what the 9 fields are that you developed further in terms of more concrete practical descriptions and approaches in your book, because you mentioned some like education or medicine or the relationship with nature, but you may want to give us a full list what the 9 areas you developed.
Sure, Gabor. So others are family and childhood, which we know is a basis for human flourishing and also our capacity to be able to contribute positively to society. So there, in terms of public policies, could be parenting programs, parental leaves, etc. Then there is a chapter on work and organization. I'm talking about especially the book of Frédéric Laloux, Reinventing Organization, and what this kind of new paradigm means for an organization. There is a chapter on food and agriculture, showing how we need to work more with nature and with a more systemic understanding of the multifunctionalities of agriculture, and how if we would be in better mental health and we would eat maybe more sustainably, and at the same time how eating well can contribute to our flourishing. There is a chapter, of course, on economy. That's a big chapter, talking about new value systems, new indicators, also for nations. The need to focus on one hand on our satisfying our basic needs, which is a key to allow also a healthy cultural evolution, while respecting planetary boundaries. and at the same time moving towards an economy more of being, which answers our needs for being. So, well, there's a lot of things in the chapter on economy, and I've mentioned, I think, in this presentation, the other ones: education, health, justice, governance, nature. So I think these are the 9.
Thank you, Thomas. Ruben Flores has a question. So Ruben.
Thanks, Gabor, and thank you, Thomas, for this very, very insightful talk. I really enjoyed that and learned a lot, and I'll definitely look for the book. I'm just wondering about your thoughts on climate change, given the urgency of the crisis we're facing. You know that, and the calls for urgent action. Like, I'm thinking of Andreas Malm's recent book, or books rather. Like, and at the same time, the rise of the far right in many countries. So it's kind of very, very ugly landscape we're facing, and I'm just wondering about your thoughts on this. Thanks.
Climate. Sorry, I want to move a bit. Okay, it's okay. Sorry, I can't see my. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Thomas.
Okay, good. Climate change, the rise of the far right. So, yeah, I think, as I said, we are at a very crucial point. We are in an evolutive crisis. So we are the worst, and because we are facing, such dangers, we may be able to evolve, make this big evolutionary leap that I refer to in this book. Otherwise, we know that for individuals, it's the same at the collective level. It's only when we are really in trouble that we open ourselves to deeper changes. So we have a climate emergency. That's very clear. I've been working in that field myself for quite some time now already, and yeah, I imagine the question comes, do we have like the luxury to invest in our cultural evolution and human flourishing while it's so urgent to deal with climate change? Maybe that could be also a bit your question. So I would not oppose both. As Gabor said, we are working with a Conscious Food Systems Alliance, convened by the United Nations Development Programme, because we recognize that inner development is a key to make happen a systemic transformation of the food system that would support the fight against climate change. In terms of the rise of far right, I think it has, if you look at the work of sociologists that try to make sense of it, it has a lot to do with rise of inequalities and also, of course, of globalization, both threatening, Ingelaard say we are moving from survival to self-expression, but if our survival is threatened by inequalities, and if our sense of identity is threatened by globalization, migration, etc., then we come up to more regressive, we could say, political values as expressed in far-right movements. So, yeah, I think this I think this is part of this evolutionary crisis. It's interesting. Some political scientists, I think in France, have also shown that they compared, the voters of the far right in many countries, and what they concluded is that it's really rooted in this sense of distrust. There are people that don't trust anymore any institutions. So, and that's, you know, very much this kind of logic of separation that I was referring to. So in that sense, politics of being can help deal, or and also, as I mentioned, in the field of governance, you know, politics is very much polarized because we are coming from this adversarial democracy system. So I think these are all bits that can allow to approach, to deal with this the far right movement challenges in politics. Yeah, I hope it answers your question.
Thank you, Ruben. I would like to turn to Catherine. Catherine, where she posted a question in the chat, and you may want to raise your question, Catherine, live. Yeah, you are here.
Okay. Hi, Thomas. Great talk. Wonderful. My question is probably unanswerable. It's more sort of thoughts for your reflections, really. As you probably know, the Mindfulness Initiative in the UK is very much on board with this kind of thinking and agenda. And in fact, we have, that's what you outlined is the policy direction that we're going in, including particularly in education. So, you know, I think we all share the aims. What's perplexing us is two things, really. One is the mechanisms by which to do it, you know, in a world of where so many of the forces are leading us towards what you described as, you know, heaven or hell. They're leading us towards hell. You know, the traditional education system, for example, and that some of the rise of some features, we've talked about the far right, but also the digital age is not helping. And I think we were all horrified by a trailer we saw for the notion of the metaverse that we're all supposed to be living in the future, which has no relationship at all with reality or connection. We're just living in a sort of digital fantasy, and that's the way forward for humanity, and so on. So I think we're trying to think about mechanisms, and we're also trying not to be naive to think that this stuff is so extremely obvious that everyone's going to say, oh yes, obviously, let's all join together to connect, to move to higher things, to be altruistic, you know, all the things that we want. It's how we get there that's the difficulty, and how we get there before it's too late. What we're thinking about in the Mindfulness Initiative is trying to make coalitions of similar thinking people, often with rather disparate you know, agendas, with different narratives and terminologies and nouns and things, but trying to get below that to the common principles that we all have, using words like connection, development of the inner person, and so on. And so trying to think, how do we bring people together to do this fight? So I say it's not particularly a question, it's just whether you have any thoughts about the kind of things that are perplexing us. You know, what are the mechanisms, and how do we realistically engage in this against the forces that are pushing in the other direction before it's all a bit too late?
Thank you, Catherine. No, I do resonate a lot with what you said, and I think what I found, you know, is that, as you said, I wanted to articulate in a general perspective, showing like that those are talking about system thinking, those are talking about mindfulness, those are talking about life, all these different are indeed talking about the, if we go beyond these wordings, these different labels, propose something that unite all this perspective in a larger perspective, a larger development paradigm. So, and align a bit our narratives also in this larger narrative. So indeed, I think the same coalition, you know, that's what we're doing with right now. The Conscious Food Systems Alliance are very important from that perspective. And I would say, I mean, in different you could have also sectoral. I mean, we are a sectoral coalition in the food. We could have these in all sectors. We could have religious traditions also trying to engage a bit more in this from a wisdom-based approach to social issues and the evolution of our societies. So yeah, definitely coalitions are very important. You mentioned social media. I think I had it on my PowerPoint, but I did not develop that. But obviously there is a lot. We should have a better regulation of social media. They should basically right now they cultivate the worst in human beings often, and they could be designed differently to cultivate the best, as has been done by some, for example, political platforms like in Taiwan. They have this digital democracy that is often served as an example for the world, where they design their platforms for people to interact, and rather than giving a premium to the ones that are most outrageous, they are giving a premium to the ones that are kind of building a consensus, trying to build a consensus. So you know, all these different aspects in our institutions, they are all different small pieces of a larger puzzle. But if we are able to identify them and work on them and articulate that in a more global agenda, because I think, you know, the key thing is, an important insight for me is that the recognition that I'm not sure completely is often not there about the depths of the crisis that we are facing and how much it entails for us to change. And to me, it goes all the way to redefining or why we are here, you know, our priorities in our life at the individual level and at the collective level. And my work as an environmentalist make me think that if we don't, because there is this development paradigm focused on economic growth, there is little we can achieve or it's not enough that we can achieve within this paradigm, and really need to rethink what are our priorities as individuals and as societies. So not probably not a magic formula, but maybe some pieces of answers to your question, hopefully.
Thank you, Tom. I know Catherine's work well, and her involvement in the Mindfulness Initiative. And you mentioned the COFSA, the Conscious Food Systems Alliance, in which we at Mind and Life Europe cooperate with other organizations like Jamie Bristow's Mindfulness Initiative, the organization Catherine referred to and he founded. And I know the thinking of this coalition from being part of the journey. And I know that what Catherine referred to as coalition building is one of the most important and promising ways to go forward in all these sectors. Without coalition building, without bringing all the diverse organizations and individuals together who can facilitate in one specific sector, there would be no much hope at the systemic level. We can, of course, talk a lot about the individual change that is needed, and that's very much needed, but we also need to function at the organizational and systemic and societal level, where new systems and new institutions and new procedures and new policies are to be made and created. And that's what these coalitions try to foster and try to create. And you are part of that, and you are one of the initiators of this Coalition on Food Systems Alliance. And it's great that Mindfulness Initiative and Mind and Life Europe can be part of that, and we can work on these various sectors together. I would like to turn to Wolfgang. Wolfgang Lucas posed 2 questions in the chat, and we have another one from Sylvia, so we would have time for at least these 2 questions. If there would be others, we will see whether we will have time for them. Hopefully, yes. So, Wolfgang.
Okay, thank you, Gabor. Thank you, Thomas. Very inspired and by again, just like at ESWI, by your sharing of your vision. And so I'd like to ask you 2 potentially challenging questions, and hope that it serves. The one is about values, because you listed several values in the in your talk. And then I always think about how to excuse me, the word is difficult to say, operationalize or put into practice these values so they become lived experience from what would otherwise be an abstract concept like beauty or honesty or integrity or so, where it's easy to say yes to it, like, yes, I adhere to this, or yes, I support this. But in the nitty-gritty details of everyday life, it might be different or challenging. And so I'd like to ask you if you have some thoughts or maybe examples for the where it might, an example where it might be easy to take one of the values that you could think of from that are fundamental for your work, and to say, and this is an easy way to implement this that I find easy, and maybe one where you say, well, this is a challenging one where I maybe don't even have the answer yet, or something like that. So an easy and then difficult example for turning values into practice. That's the first question, and then I have a second one, but maybe I'll start with the first one. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Very good question. Yeah, I'm trying to make sense of what I found, and I call it values without putting too much emphasis on defining it, etc. But so I say, for example, life, and I'm trying to show also that in all these that have been emphasized by many wisdom traditions. So indigenous traditions, for example, have always looked at how life is functioning and trying to copy that in their social organization, for example. So right now, I mentioned, like, in this the work of Frédéric Laloux and Reinventing Organization. He says that basically the metaphor for these more evolved organizations is nature, and basically they are organization much more fluid, much more adaptable, and they are like living organisms. And it's there are a lot of already teal organizations which are based on these principles. So that's a very concrete example. In the economy, we see also new economic systems that are especially those that want to be more efficient in resources, more ecological, that works more like systems, like living systems, like nature does. Nature recycle its waste, etc. So they're very the circular economy, etc. is based on how nature operates. Of course, I'm talking about assigning rights to nature. So that's also, recognizing somehow this value of life. So that and most of the policy agendas that I've developed in the 9 sectoral chapters come from these more philosophical chapters. So there is very a clear link between most of them. Maybe the one that are not because of values, for example, a chapter on, I call it understanding, but it's about systemic complex thinking and how everything is interconnected. So this is a little bit more philosophical, maybe not so much a bit less applicable, but well, as I said, new economic systems are also trying to have people more connected and collaborating along the value chain, for example. The one on last one I call mystery. I have less policy applications, but what I developed in my chapter on nature is what many wisdom keepers from indigenous traditions do and advocate in terms of the earth being a living being. They are their sacred sites, and they know that by taking care of these sacred sites by doing their rituals, their ceremony. They are nourishing the earth, and that is important for the health of Mother Earth as a living being. So yeah, there's always there's some connections always with the more concrete policy parts with these values. On beauty, you mentioned there is this experience which I found wonderful in a very not a slum, but a poor neighborhood in Mexico, where they are this they really try to make the neighborhood looks really nice, repaint all the houses, do some even arts on the walls, etc. And there seems to be a decrease of violence, insecurity, and people getting social relations improving in that neighborhood. It's like also when you do public gardens. We have seen that public gardens have many green spaces in cities, have many positive social benefits, including decrease in crimes for some reason. So I hope it answers your first question.
Thanks. Partly yes, but maybe I'll write to you to kind of specify more the direction that I also had in mind. Mm-hmm. Should I ask a second question now, or maybe let Silvia go first and then return?
Yes, that's a good idea. We can hear Silvia and then come back to you, and then we have Lydia as well. So we could probably spend another 5-7 minutes before concluding.
Yeah.
Silvia.
Thank you. Yes, a wonderful talk, Thomas. Many thanks. I would so dearly love to see your vision, your story becoming the dominant narrative. I just wonder, you started, I think, with some ideas in answering the last questions about the dominant economic paradigm at the moment of capitalism based on us consuming more and more and growth, and whether you could share some ideas on how we can tackle that.
Sure, Silvia. From the text you wrote, you said it seems hard to find sustainable alternatives that would foster greater equality in the world, right? Like it's difficult to find alternatives to capitalism because they would foster greater inequality, you believe? Okay.
Well, I think capitalism is clearly the inequality the gap has grown so much in the past 30 years. And the rich getting richer all the time, even during the COVID crisis. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I understand you. So we kind of agree that there's a problem with capitalism, even from the point of view of growing inequalities. So what is the alternative? So I think first the most important issue is that right now we don't have really our development paradigm is more oriented towards economic growth, but economic growth should be a mean for an end. Right now it's just an end in itself, and that's why we don't have really control or even vision of where we want to go together. The same for technological development, it's an end in itself. So I think that's first, it's important to be able to really define, the economic system should be able to serve our objectives rather than be economic growth being an end in itself. So what I think we need to review basically all the main institutions of capitalism. And this will not be easy, of course. But this would follow this change of values that I was mentioning, regarding my chapter on economy. If we collectively value more and more, the people that are that are more wiser, that are happier, people will tend to that brings good to society. There will be some social incentives for every individual to be the best in that sense, rather than to those that have more money or power. So I was saying, looking at the different institutions on which capitalism is built, one big one is how corporates work, this, and there we should give more space, much more space and incentives to economic organizations whose objective is to serve the common good. So we have already some new forms of corporations. The challenge is, how do we strengthen them? How we give them more space through, we could have incentives for them to be more competitive on the market than their competitors who are aiming only for profits. That's an important one. The way also looking at the governance of companies, if they could include more their workers, for example, there would be some science show that they would be more sustainable. If we are talking about even companies like that's more inclined toward the common good, they may include even their stakeholders in their governance. So that's one thought. I think an important one also, and we talk about a little bit about the digital economy. So the reform of intellectual property rights, which at the moment have created this huge monopoly because of the platform effects, where they tend to dominate. So the market tends to destroy itself basically, and we should be much more mindful in terms of impeding the creation of this monopoly. The internet is something that is public. Nobody owns it. Why is Facebook a private company? It could be also a public company designed, or public service designed for the common good. And that would be much more efficient. So there have been some studies that shows, for example, the music business in the Netherlands. It could create 4 or 5 times more values if everybody would access to all of the music that is being composed, and we could raise the funds to pay the artist through different means, and that would create a lot of social values. So intellectual property wise is also an important aspect. Or monetary systems, the local currencies, but also the public creation of money. So that's a bit technical, but there is definitely a big lever there. So yeah, just and we said, I think inequalities is a very important issue, because the sociologists tell us that people need to feel secure in terms of their basic needs being met, so that they can evolve towards more self-expression rather than survival. And we see that there are studies that shows clearly how inequalities is detrimental to social well-being. So there, we have already some discussions on some say universal basic income, but maybe at least a minimum guaranteed income that can also provide the space for people to go to operate from a different paradigm. Like we are often seeing, where people often think that if we have a basic income, a guaranteed basic income, then people will not work longer. And so we have to change also our vision of human nature. And the studies show that it's much overestimated, but rather a minimum guaranteed income could give the space for people to invest their time is what is really dear to them and what they really want to do, and can flourish in their work instead of just working for having a wage for money. So just some couple of options for reforming the economic system.
Yes, the basic income. I live in Switzerland, and we voted on this, and I collected signatures to try and get the initiative to the vote. But these things take a long time to become mainstream, but we keep going. So all the very best. Thank you. I must leave you now and wish you good luck.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thanks for the question. And I think Wolfgang's second question could be a good end note, because it's really interesting. So I would like to turn to him in the end. But before that, I would like to ask Lydia to share any comment that you have posted already in the chat. It's really interesting to hear about your work as well. So can you share a little bit more? And then I would turn to Wolfgang as the last question, because that's interesting too. Lydia?
Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to have met you only recently, a couple of days ago, and be part of this so interesting discussion. I lived in an indigenous community for 3 years and returned 25 years later to find that that the transition that the people went through was incredibly detrimental in terms of nutrition, in terms of physical, spiritual, mental health. And so we are now working on how to base other indigenous development paradigms on traditional knowledge. And this links very much to everything Thomas says about entering a world whereby there is access, limited access to technology, and but no, and in theory also to wisdom, but that the two need to be connected in order for our world to evolve. So.
Thank you, Lydia. As I said, my spiritual path started with native spirituality, so I'm very much inspired by that, and I think more generally, nations need to reconnect to their traditional wisdom. Yeah.
I know that this approach to traditional wisdom is very much at the center of the COFSA initiative as well. At least we would like to make it central. So thank you. So finally, Wolfgang, we can come back to your second question, and that's an interesting one on the term more. So can you explain what you mean by it and how you meant it? And then we would end, and if you can wait, I would just like to announce 2 more upcoming events this year at MLE, and then we will finish.
Okay, thanks, Gabor. So I put on my devil's advocate hat now, in a way. When you proposed the transition from having more to being more, which I think it would be a tremendous improvement, very likely for the world anyway, there's still something there in the word more that made me think that maybe the same tendency that would make the having more part in our world pathological could come into the being more in some kind of spiritual materialism kind of sense. And lead to another kind of problem. So, yeah, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. And maybe it's more a point for reflection than for a definitive answer. But in any case, do you see that there might be some danger in the?
Yeah, no, I see your point. It's a point on language also, because spiritual teachings, tell us that also language is often tricky because there is no way to spiritual realization somehow. So I use this sentence. I use only the sentence from the Earth Charter, so it's not necessarily my wording. I use more being as our main objective. But I don't use so much being more, but it was from the Earth Charter, and I wanted to offer, something. I see the Earth Charter. I know some people say like that it has been one of the most discussed texts, in particular with spiritual leaders, etc. So I think it's a really good reference to which to anchor this framework of the politics of being. Yeah, no, of course, then we could have spiritual materialism, etc. But if it's a byproduct of a general reorientation for societies, of course, you know, in every orientation there are some negative or unhealthy byproducts, you know, and that is just you manage them just through evolution, you know, higher consciousness. But they are, you know, whenever you give a new direction, you will often have misinterpretation, etc. That's you can't avoid that. So no, I think there is, you know, cultivating the wisdom about what does that mean being, or, you know, whatever we call that. I think a good term right now, a little bit less deep, human flourishing, that is often used in all the positive psychology, positive social science. So yeah, of course, I think that's what I can share on this. Thank you again.
Yeah, it was interesting that Wolfgang has also answered his question, saying that it may be too early at this stage. It would be nice to turn to that direction first and then face that challenge, what that means, what that more being, and what that spiritual materialism might mean in the end. But I hope that if we can turn into this direction that Thomas proposes, we will be able to face and tackle that challenge as well. The current one seems to be bigger and more vital actually at this point in time, but the understanding of the context of the term more is also part of the issue here. So thanks, Wolfgang, for raising that and your other question. And thank you all for participating in this really engaging talk and discussion and topic. And thank you, Thomas, for leading us into your mind, your thinking, and your views. So we are very much looking forward to reading your book and being in touch with you on a longer term basis, inviting you to other events and discussions that we plan to organize in the coming year and more. So I would just like to mention two other events this year before concluding the year that we are organizing. One is Francisco and Friends talk by Valerie Bonardel on December 9th. That's going to be next Thursday, just a week from now. If you are interested, please feel free to join us. And the final event we are going to organize is going to be a Mind Matters talk. We had Richie Davidson, Matthew Ricard, Roshi John Halifax, Mingyur Rinpoche, and Alan Wallace talking about why mind matters. And they all had their own individual perspectives on this topic earlier this year and last year. And our next speaker and last event this year will be a discussion with Rebecca Crane on teaching mindfulness-based programs with quality and integrity. And this talk will be translated into multiple languages live, Spanish, French, Chinese, at least. So we are very much looking forward to this event on December 13th, Monday, just before everyone is turning to a more restful and peaceful period in the end of the year. So thank you very much. Thank you all for joining and participating. It was really great to have you, Thomas, here with us. Thanks.
Thank you for receiving me.